Welcome Ravens and Germs once again to the Golden View, and as always, I'm your host Nicholas McConnaughay, and you're watching this on the Masochist Gaming Network. For today's edition, we'll be taking a look at a game that is pretty special, a game that is ranked by many as being one of the greatest games of all time. However, the question remains for me whether it's not all just, smoke and mirrors, all hype, or if this game did successfully manage to catch lightning in a bottle, shades of Prince of Persia Sands of Time, or like Batman Arkham City. Yeah, for today's edition of the Golden View, we'll be taking a look at Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is a survival horror video game developed by the veteran game-making company that is Capcom. It conversely was also published by Capcom. The game is the fourth titled entry in the Resident Evil series, but is the sixth main entry to the series as a whole. The game was originally released for the Nintendo GameCube in January of 2005 in North America and Japan, and in March 2005 in Europe and Australia. It, of course, eventually was released on the PlayStation 2, which is the version of the game that I'll be reviewing today. The game brought about gameplay differentiating from all the previous titles in the Resident Evil series, and implemented antics such as the over-the-shoulder view, which you can often see in games like Dead Space and Gears of War. The series also essentially redefined the survival horror genre from this point moving forward, which is why it's often regarded as one of the most influential games of the decade. The story takes place 6 years after the events of Resident Evil 2, and former Raccoon City police officer Leon Scott Kennedy has been sent on a rescue mission to save Ashley Graham, the President of the United States' daughter, who has been kidnapped by a mysterious cult. Throughout the game, he travels to a rural village in Europe where he encounters a vast compilation of villagers that pledge themselves to Los Iluminados, or the Enlightened Ones in Spanish, the cult that kidnapped Ashley. While in the village, Leon is captured by the chief and injected with a parasite called Las Plagas, same as Ashley. Basically, the objective throughout the entire game is to bring Ashley to safety, cure both of them and the parasite slowly eating away at them, as well as conquer the vicious, bloodthirsty cult that seems intent on destruction. Honestly, I don't think you'll ever find a story better for a video game than the one that was put together here. The story is simple to a degree, but it's also suspenseful, well thought out, and as energizing as what anyone could ask for. It has enough twists and turns, triumphs and downfalls, and little victories to keep the gamer content the entire way with the story. 9 out of 10. And it might be my favorite story, second only to the story in Sands of Time. And I think that it'd be fair to say that this game is more consistent with its themes. Resident Evil 4 marked a pivotal moment when it comes to the Resident Evil franchise as a whole. There have been times when Resident Evil stepped out of its comfort zone before, like for example with the Resident Evil Survivor series, when they entirely redid everything for a first-person style and look. But mostly, Resident Evil was known for its relatively quirky controls. I am not saying that the previous games had bad controls, but I think most of us can agree that it took first-time gamers a little bit of time to get used to them. Resident Evil 4 went in a completely different direction both with story and with controls. Traded in the fixed camera angles for an over-the-shoulder perspective, the discussion of how things were done with the previous games is a discussion for another video. However, I will at least say that I think this game worked much better the way it was, and not the way it could have been. The controls brought expansion and precision when it came to shooting, and with bullets becoming less scarce, the pace is quickened and more action-oriented. Although I will admit that there were hundreds of times throughout the game where I didn't have ammo. I'm not really a big fan of ammo being scarce personally. I see what it's meant to accomplish. However, it can make a game at times more frustrating than legitimately scary. I don't know what to say about the controls except to say that their excellence is a very complex form of excellence, a way that you might not initially see but will eventually come to appreciate. They're just fun to play with for the most part and really help add a style to the game that wasn't often seen before with other games. The only things that I didn't like about the game were the fact that you were unable to move with a knife or gun. I'm not as much bothered about not being able to move with a gun because honestly, in a way it sort of works, as if it adds a form of style to it, but the knife is the problem. Often I found myself pulling out the knife, slashing, only for the creature to move, attack me, and since I couldn't face him with the knife, I had to put it away and get back into position. Nevertheless, the controls are still awesomely put together, and aside from that, I've got no complaints. 8 out of 10. I've always been on the wrong side of shaking heads whenever I'm seen playing a game for the original PlayStation or PlayStation 2, but I've learned not to let it bother me very much. I guess that some just don't see what I see, which is fine, but this game is the finest example of that. I found the scenery to be beautifully embroidered, formulating a both enchanted and yet unsettling atmosphere. The creatures literally had sadism oozing out of their very pores, among other things, and the scenery, well, it was just awesome. You'll find very little inconsistencies in the graphics. I don't recall coming across a glitch or an unexplained moment of lagginess throughout it all, and that's impressive. Everybody just looked awesome. And I don't know what else to say. The chainsaw guy, fucking Jesus, he was terrifying. I'm giving the controls a 9.5 out of 10. The gameplay of the game is what makes Resident Evil 4 quite possibly one of the greatest games of all time. Throughout the game, you'll come across a vast repertoire of enemies, many of them with a distinctive way to defeat them, and with the mess of weapons that you have to choose from, as well as their upgrades, you're given many options. The game made things that shouldn't have worked work. The implementation of quick-time events in video games almost never works, with something like Castlevania Lords of Shadow being the exception. But this game put them in the most perfect areas possible, and actually made it add something to the game. Then there's Ashley being your sidekick. A lot of the games, when they add a female secondary heroine to the mix, usually, quite frankly, it sucks. They take away from the gameplay as well as the atmosphere, however, for the most part, she wasn't too bad. Albeit she gets kidnapped enough for this to be a Liam Neeson movie, but when she is around, she's not very much of a burden. The game also features numerous puzzles and other added snippets that ultimately give the gameplay itself more depth. The boss battles are intriguingly formulated, each usually having something unique about them and that you'll remember even after the game has been put away. The game itself is also considerably challenging. I died many times while playing the game, however it's a kind of challenge that you appreciate. There are numerous games out there that think just tweaking how long it takes to kill something will make the game more challenging and more enjoyable, but that's not the case here. This game is harder because it requires more cunning and collective thinking than what might be expected. This game is challenging because it challenges the mind of the gamer in a way that is actually enjoyable. The gameplay gets a 9.5 out of 10 from me. Two other exceptional things about the game that I want to point out are the music and the portrayal of the characters. The music itself manages to successfully make the atmosphere even more enjoyable than what it already was. It almost manages to literally cool the heat of the gamer in this already chilling atmosphere, and really brings you into the moment, which is exactly what music is supposed to do in gaming. The methodical melodies are probably some of the best out there when it comes to adding more bang to everything else. As for the characters, I think it'd be fair to say from the very beginning with Resident Evil 1, individuals weren't necessarily sure what to think about Resident Evil in terms of actual dialogue and character development. The gameplay was almost always exceptional, but the dialogue of the characters needed some fine-tuning. Leon isn't necessarily the greatest wisecracker in the world, but he certainly is more lifelike than what we had ever seen before with the games. He looked and acted similar to what someone may look and act like in the same situation. Okay. Bringing my opinion of this game to its final conclusion, the game lives up to all the nostalgic hype that is backing it. The game is one of, if not the most revolutionary and important games in history. Numerous refer to Resident Evil as the grandfather of the zombie game genre, and this, in my opinion, is certainly in its prime, and one for the ages. They put time and effort into even the smallest detail of the game, and it paid off indefinitely. For the overall gaming experience of this game, I am giving it a perfect 10 out of 10. When you add everything together and divide, you get an average rating of 9.2 out of 10, the second highest rating that I've ever given for a video game thus far, and rest assured, it's well deserved. Thanks for joining me on this edition of The Golden View, here on the Masochist Gaming Network, and I'll see you next time.